Good morning, everybody. It is wonderful, as always, to have you all on the call and to have you with us today. We have an amazing speaker. I and my colleagues are all extremely excited about having Richard with us today. I am sure that you're all going to get lots and lots of value. So Richard Sutton is, I'm not going to do a whole bio on him other than to say he wrote this book, Stressproof, the game plan. He also wrote another book called The Stress Code. He is incredibly knowledgeable about stress and the impact of stress on our bodies and what we can do about it. So I'm going to invite you, if you are able to please switch on your video. It's so much nicer for Richard to speak to some faces rather than names on a black box. And then we could have the sense of community. So we are going to create an opportunity for us to go into a small group soon. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Richard. He's just going to lead us into this process, and then we'll do a breakup in a few minutes. Richard, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your time and for this opportunity to really share my passion with everyone. And we're talking stress, and we're talking mental health, and we're talking performance and adaptability, and all things that are relevant at this time. And I think that we can all identify with, we 15, 16 months into the COVID crisis, everything that's come before, where we're holding now, the future that's uncertain. We can identify with many of the symptoms of stress. The symptoms exist within the emotional domain, the symptoms exist within the cognitive domain, the symptoms exist within the physical domain. And I think this is a reality that we've faced for many months now, whether it's digestive issues or whether it's low mood or a little bit of anxiety or sleeplessness. And depending on where we're holding in our stress cycle, because stress goes through cycles, more intense in periods and a little bit less intense in other periods, will basically reflect where our symptom set is. But the thing about chronic stress is that what we don't really understand, or what we don't know that well, is the long-term implications. And we've been talking vaccines, long-term implications. We've been talking this whole COVID experience and the long-term implications. But stress in itself also has long-term implications and associations. And anyone, I think many of us, myself included, have experienced childhood adversity, come through childhood adversity. And there's been many research papers on childhood adversity and what happens in terms of vitality and health and well-being later on in life. And what's been identified is if you're not going to make changes in your life, or haven't made change in life, or don't recreate your life or recompose your life, the childhood adversity that one would experience can actually decrease lifespan by 7 to 15 years, according to research. The mechanisms are normally related to the immune system. The mechanisms are normally related to something called methylation, which is a complex process that governs a lot to do with our genetic behaviors and neurochemistry. But it's not just childhood adversity. It was a great study. And the study, why it really was a study that I've connected to so well, is that the lead researcher won the Nobel Prize for medicine, especially in genetics. And she was looking at individuals experiencing different types of stresses over a 2-year period. And now we're going into the second year of this COVID crisis. So it's very relevant to us because we've all been in the state of chronic stress. All of us, no one's exempt. So they were looking at stress as an experience and how it affects our cells. Can it age our cells? And the theory was it could. So they looked at a group of 58 women over a period of 2 years, interviewing them pertaining to their stress, that took samples, cell samples before the study, cell samples during and after the study. And basically we're looking at the adverse effects of chronic stress on health and well-being. So 3 groups emerged in the 58 participant group or cohort. 3 groups. One experienced pretty much normal stresses, day-to-day, no stress, 4 or 5 incidents a week, but nothing serious or nothing that's consequential. The other group experienced intense stress, but it passed. So it was short intervals, a week here, a week there, but it passed, and they went through waves. And there was another group, or the last group, experienced chronic stress throughout this entire period. They were stressed about family events, about work, whatever it was. And they wanted to look at what happened to these cells. So in the group that experienced minimal or no stress, if they were chronologically a certain age, biologically they're the same age. So if they were 38, their cells were 38. When they looked at the group that experienced intense stress, intense, for a period of a week or two here or there, they expected a change, but there was no change. Short-term stress had no effect on cell aging. But when they looked at the group that experienced chronic stress, the same stress we're all experiencing now, what they found was that those cells in a 2-year period had aged by 9 to 17 years. What I'm saying is almost 1 to 2 decades of additional aging in all our cells in response to the circumstances we're confronted with now. But the crazy thing is that it doesn't have to be like this. There's a different reality out there. And this is a reality that was introduced to me first in professional sports. I spent 2 decades in professional sport supporting and augmenting the performance of athletes. In a really large, I think it was 2014 Spanish study, 42,000 people over an extended period of time. It was a meta-analysis. 10 studies, I think, in the meta-analysis. What they were looking at is athletes and the prevalence of age-related diseases, longevity, well-being. Now, athletes, we assume, have this euphoric life and this easy life where it's all money and it's all fame and recognition and everyone's doing things for you. It cannot be further from the truth. A handful of athletes experience that. The vast majority struggle financially, struggle with loneliness, struggle with injuries, struggle with relationships, everything we're experiencing, but just in that magnified state. But this study wanted to see how they impacted by the stresses they're confronted with. And what the researchers found was amongst athletes, cancer rate, almost non-existent, cardiovascular disease, not very prevalent, life expectancy was higher. So another study came along looking at a more long-term play, 50 years, monitoring athletes over that extended period and using a control group of non-athletes. Do athletes really live longer with all the stresses they're confronted with? The top Olympic athlete in the States will earn $1,500 a month. They sacrifice education, future opportunities. That's it. When they get their gold medal and they retire from the sport, that's it. So the 50-year study found that professional athletes, or athletes on the most part, live 6 years longer. But the most important thing that came from the study was it's not related to exercise. So golfers have the same longevity as soccer players. Golfers have the same, or chess players, or have the same longevity as other athletes in more vigorous activities, triathletes. So there's no correlation between the amount of activity that you do and this advantage in longevity. So what was that secret? What is a secret that we can apply to our lives to mitigate some of the effects that we're exposed to right now? Now, the secret they have is the capacity to understand this system known as the vagus nerve. You see, stress has an off button. You can turn stress off anytime you want to. Normally, stress is governed by something called a negative feedback loop. So when our stress hormone levels rise and rise and rise and rise, what happens is a region of the brain will detect that and literally say, guys, it's off, turn it off right now. But when we've been stressed for long periods of time, this whole loop gets corrupted and sometimes we can't turn it off. But we have a fail-safe, a nerve that connects the brain to the rest of the body. If we stimulate this nerve, we can turn stress off from a biological standpoint within 30 seconds. Now, the activities that stimulate this nerve are all the activities that athletes engage in on a daily or twice daily basis. Cold baths, cold showers, cold plunges, physical therapies, osteopathy, physio, massage, yoga, meditation, water submersion. These are all things that they do on an ongoing basis to support recovery. But what they are doing is mitigating, eliminating, and reducing the adverse effects of stress on their systems by doing so, by recalibrating their body at least once or twice a day. But one of the most powerful tools that we have in stimulating this nerve is changing the way we breathe. And that is where I want to dive into this exercise. So there's a technique known as the 4-7-8 technique. In order to activate the vagus nerve, turn off the biological response to stress, or the stress axis, what we would need to do, I'm going to talk you through it and then take you through it, is take a deep inhalation through the nose for a period of 4 seconds. We're then going to hold our breath for a period of 7 seconds. We're then going to exhale through pursed lips for a period of 8 seconds. And we only have to repeat this 4 times in order to shut down the stress axis. So the events that you're confronted with are not going to change, but by your biological state will. Your immune markers will come down, cortisol will start dropping, and you'll create this biological balance that will support you in these times. And you can do it any time of the day, any day of the week, with very little time. So let's dive into the technique. So I'd like you to just sit yourselves upright in your chairs. Just adjust your chairs, sit upright. Relax the shoulders, relax your arms. You're going to close your mouth, take a deep inhalation for 4 counts through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale through pursed lips for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to repeat. Inhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out through pursed lips for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Last one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And that's your stress axis shut down. I would do it once a day, or at key moments where you feel overwhelmed or challenged by the circumstances.
So thank you, Richard. Oh my goodness, that was amazing. We're going to go into breakout rooms very quickly and not going to spend lots of time in the breakout rooms, but just a few minutes to go and connect with a few other people and make sure that we set the scene that this isn't going to just be Richard talking at you. This is going to be us being very actively engaged. So you'll get an invitation to go to the breakout room. In the breakout room, there will be 2 other people, and the invitation is for you to just share with the other people, why did you decide to join the session today? What was it about this invitation that made you say, I want to be there? And in doing that, you are claiming co-ownership for the session. So Richard's also going to join one of the sessions. So one of you will be lucky to spend some time with Richard. And then, so the invitation is just to say to the other people, why did you decide to show up today? Everybody gets a chance to speak. There'll be about 5 minutes in the breakout room, and then we'll bring you back. So enjoy your little time with an amazing group of people. some. So welcome back, everybody. I'm going to ask that you just so that we have kind of that we sure we capture your wants and make sure that we meet your requirement. If you could just very briefly share in the chat function, why did you join the session? I was in a room with someone who said she joined because she wants to develop her resilience skills to be more resilient, and she wants to kind of just remind herself of some coping mechanisms. So we're going to definitely get that from Richard today. But if you could just, for my benefit, just share with me, why did you join? And then we're going to hand over to Richard to keep going with the next part of the process. So Richard, over to you. You just need to unmute yourself, Richard.
All right, great. Just sharing. So from our discussion in the breakout room, I think that tools and skills and resources in order to cope better with the challenge we're confronted with seems to be the theme and the overwhelming set as to why most of us are participating in this session. But I think before we start moving into those skills to manage others, skills to manage ourselves, we have to understand what we're dealing with in the first place. What is the challenge that we're all confronted with, and how did it come about? And we have to know what it means to be South African within the context of stress as well. And our experience of stress goes back a long way. If we go back to 2013, Bloomberg rated South Africa as the second most stressed country on the planet. And what was so incredible about the study was the fact that it was objective measures. It wasn't subjective. It wasn't a questionnaire filled out by 1,000 or 10,000 people. They were looking at homicide rates, GDP per capita, income inequality, unemployment, urban air pollution, life expectancy, all these objective measures, and putting these 7 equally weighted variables together, we were assigned this title of number 2 in the world, silver medalist in stress, behind Nigeria, if anyone's thinking about which country. And from that point onwards, we've just been in this cycle of these indexes, whether it's stress or whether it's the misery index. The misery index is an index that is typically used, Bloomberg again, but there's a variety of different misery indexes in the world. And what they do is they take seasonally adjusted unemployment rates and annual rates of inflation. And our inflation, I think, is 4.4%, and unemployment is 32.7%, whatever it is. And you can understand why in 2017, second most miserable country on the planet, 2018 third, 2019 third, 2020 third, and if unemployment's anything to go by, we're probably going to be third or second again this year as well. So this is the landscape that we're confronted with. We are intrinsically very resilient, but if we look at what's happening on the ground with professionals, this is data from ProfMed, the latest data from ProfMed, we see that 40% of professionals are experiencing high levels or very high levels of stress on any given day. Also, what we're seeing is 39% of professionals are experiencing ongoing negative thoughts, just feeling down and dejected and low and pessimistic about the future. And what we've also seen, and what's completely understandable, is this has risen to by 42%, this experience of high stress and ongoing negative thoughts, since the lockdown has begun. But the one theme that has become really central to the South African narrative is the theme of mental health. And historically, we've really been challenged in this space. And you'll see some newspaper headlines comparing the mental health crisis to the HIV crisis. That's how significant it is. And if we look at mental health and specifically depression in the workplace, what we see is that 1 in 4 individuals, based on research, has been diagnosed with depression in the workplace, 25% of the workforce. Now, there's a very strong relationship to stress and depression, an extremely strong. It's a bidirectional relationship, but intimate. If you start looking at different stresses and start identifying those stresses and their relationship to mental health, what we see is this very, very concerning picture. There was an incredible meta-analysis of 228 studies by teams at Harvard and Stanford universities some years ago, about 5-6 years ago, looking at the implications of stress on mental health compromise, specifically for the purpose of changing policy within the US government. And what they identified that if we are experiencing financial pressure, I don't know who's not experiencing financial pressure right now, it increases your risk of depression and mental health compromise by 90%. At the same time, work-family conflict increases our risk of mental health compromise. When we're torn between the work responsibility and our kids coming in, and now we're back to homeschool, a lot of us are back to homeschooling. A lot of us have kids like running in and out while we're on meetings. That conflict increases our risk of mental health compromise by 160%. Long working hours. Most of us are working 2 hours longer. The days have extended. The weeks have become the weekends. The days become the nights. I mean, it's completely converged now because of dysfunctional meeting behavior, just this whole recalibration of work. And the long working hours increases mental health risk by 60%. But the prevailing challenge at the moment is a lack of control and a lack of certainty. That is basically what defines the times, COVID-19, is we don't know what's going to happen next. And that really brings about intrinsic fears. It evokes something in us. And that increases our risk of mental health compromise by 42%. But here's the thing, is that we're not subjected to one of these entities. They're not in isolation. We are experiencing financial pressure. We're experiencing work-family conflict, the uncertainty, the long working hours, the lack of support, an effort-reward balance. We don't feel valued and appreciated for the work that we're doing because everyone's just trying to survive. Now, you put all of this together and the risk of developing mental health issues becomes extremely high. And that is why we're struggling to this extent, to this degree. But you have to understand why and how. These associations are not anecdotal. There's a particular set of changes that take place in the brain in response to stress. So when we get stress, short-term stress is unbelievably liberating and energizing and health promoting and performance enhancing. Short-term stress is incredible. But we're not experiencing short-term stress, we're experiencing chronic stress. And in a state of chronic stress, our immune system changes, certain neurochemicals are not produced properly. The whole dynamics of that your neurochemical set in the brain changes, not for our better or not for our health and well-being, but almost antagonistic to our well-being. But what really happens, what underpins this change in mental health and well-being was identified a couple of years ago, I think it was 2012, by a team of researchers at Yale University School of Medicine. And what they did was they took 103 individuals between the ages of 18 and 48, young individuals, relatively speaking. And what they did was they put them through an MRI, an extensive, highly detailed MRI. And at the same time, they asked them to fill out a 140-page questionnaire on previous events and challenges and their life and the adversity. So basically looking at their experience of chronic stress as an individual, subjective, and what was going on in their brain. That's what they wanted to see. And what the researchers found was that those individuals who reported periods of extreme stress or chronic stress showed atrophy, a structural change in the brain in 7 regions that are influential in complex intellectual behavior and motivation and awareness and coordination. Basically, what I'm saying in simple terms is that the brain shrinks in response to stress. And that is why we become so prone to mental health challenges and instability. And I believe that that is the next health crisis that we're confronted with going forward. Over to you, Louise.
So Richard, I think we should keep going, do part 3, and then we'll do a quick thinking partnership, but just keep going.
Got it. So what is it doing, or how is it affecting us? So we understand that there is this mental health compromise. We understand that it's because there's structural changes in the brain, along with a whole host of chemical changes. We know what's causing it in certain respects. How is it affecting us? So the reality of mental health compromise is that it evokes fatigue and concentration issues and this indecisiveness and cognitive processing declines, and we become more volatile, we feel worthless, and we have these lasting sad and anxious and empty mood experiences. This is the reality that materializes in ourselves. And it's our self-esteem and our self-confidence, our self-worth that starts to corrode progressively. And all the hopes and the aspirations and the passion, the goals that we had for our lives, mental health is the issue. It's the enemy. It's the opposition. It's antagonistic to everything that we are aspiring to, everything that we want to achieve in our lives. And what causes this? Sometimes the circumstances that we're confronted with. In this instance, it is the circumstance, the external circumstances that we have very little control over, is corroding our ability to realize all these dreams, hopes, and aspirations, or possibly corroding. But at the same time, a business is not exempt from the challenges and from the pain. Because if you're looking at 25% of your staff or your team, it's actually 26.2% to be exact, is experiencing depression. Mild depression decreases productivity by 30%. Mild depression, you won't even pick it up, but your productivity will decline. You just don't really get to what you want to do. You just don't have the motivation or the passion. And when you're doing it, you're not really there. But if you're experiencing severe depression where you're medicating, where you're having to see a therapist on a regular basis, which so many of us are having to do right now, so many of us in this lockdown where we're disconnected, and disconnection is a big driver in mental health compromise as well, we see a 50% reduction in productivity. So what that looks like from a practical standpoint is a normal 8-hour day. You're only productive for 5.5 hours. So you might work 8 hours, but you're only getting 5.5 hours of work, or you might have to work an extra couple of hours to make up the fact that you weren't that productive. But over a week, it starts counting. It starts telling. You start losing 1.5 days every week. In a month, you lose 6 days. In a year, you lose 2 full months. And the driver is something that we can't control in its entirety. The changes, the recalibration within our socioeconomic framework. But it doesn't just affect our productivity. We also just don't want to come to work. We don't want to work. Not because we lack passion and we don't like what we're doing. We just feel completely insular and removed from society, from our lives. We start looking in on our lives. Depression increases the prevalence of absenteeism. If you have mild depression, you're likely to take 13 to 21 days off in a year. Now, if you've got 25 people taking 20 days off, that's significant. But it also increases the rate of absenteeism by up to 51%. So this is the reality that businesses are facing. And this is why we've been put in a position where South Africa, depression on the South African economy is costing us $14.8 billion every year. It's 228 billion rand or something to that extent, wherever the currencies are, 200 billion rand. That is the price tag. This was quantified by a study that was published a couple of years ago that looked at 8 diverse regions of the world, saying what is the cost of depression within the context of presenteeism, being disconnected, disassociated, and absenteeism. Almost $15 billion every single year. And it's likely to be considerably higher now based on the events that we've all experienced. And this is where we're going to move to the next part.
Thank you, Richard. Wow. So in the spirit of adult learning, we're not just going to sit here and listen to Richard talk. We're actually going to have regular pauses and say, well, what does this mean for me? So we're going to ask you now to go back into a breakout room. This time it's just going to be pairs. So there will be 2 people in a breakout room. And we're going to ask you to, each person will have the opportunity to be in service of the other. So you're going to have a pair, and in that pair, one person will give the other person 2.5 minutes to talk about your reflections on what you've heard Richard say and what that means for you. So you're just literally going to speak into the beautiful listening of another person for 2.5 minutes. After 2.5 minutes, I'll send a little message to say you have 2.5 minutes left. Now you need to change. The other person will get a chance. So each person will simply get this beautiful opportunity to make sense by speaking into the presence of, into the beautiful listening of someone else. I'm hoping that's all clear. It's literally just an opportunity for you to integrate and make sense of what you've heard so far. So I'm going to open the rooms. If there's a problem in your room, you can just call us in, or you can come back into the main room and we can help you. But we hope that everybody's going to get a beautiful opportunity to just make sense and speak into the beautiful listening of someone else. So I'm opening the rooms, and we'll bring you back after 5 minutes. So enjoy your conversation. So still Gina, Muchabeng, okay, everybody's back. So in order to kind of create a bit of a sense of engagement, please share your thoughts, if you have any, in response to what's just happened in your breakout room, in the chat. And then I just want to, before we ask Richard to continue, just want to find out if there's anybody who wants to say something to the group. So I'll keep an eye open for any person unmuting themselves, and we just want to hear any thoughts or reflections that you want to share at this point. And we're going to probably hear from about 4 or 5 people. So anybody want to say something? Comment, share. No?
So if nobody else is going to jump in, I mean, what struck me, and I'm not sure if Richard, if this is a question that I have for you or to have to all of us, is who said 8 hours is how long a human being should work every day? Maybe human beings should be only working for 4, and maybe it's only 8 hours a day some days when we're in our flow of it. Yeah. I guess that's my question to our structure of thinking, that 8 hours is how much we should be putting out there.
So I'm going to jump in on this, and maybe other people have some comments as well. But the 8-hour work day was established 80 years ago. So it was a time that is so different to today, and whether our efficiencies are different or the nature of work is vastly different. And I mean, a lot of the European countries are doing things differently. The Nordic countries specifically, shorter weeks, shorter days, seeing greater returns from that. It really depends on you and the volume that you're exposed to. I think many people aren't working 8-hour days. I think many people are working a lot longer. The threshold in terms of burnout, just to take the narrative slightly laterally, is that if you're working more than 50 hours a week, you're at risk of burnout. If you're working more than 60 hours a week, you're probably experiencing burnout right now. So that 40-hour threshold, it's a very generic thing. It was established at a time that doesn't even relate to now. And I think that the opportunity for recalibration is happening. I think that the remote working conditions are creating tremendous changes in our socio-economic fabric and the way we do things in all contexts. Maybe this is one of the opportunities that exists in COVID.
Thank you, Richard, for that response. So no, I think many of these, they're not real answers, but it's important for us to start asking the questions. Anybody else want to say something before we continue? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I'm not seeing any microphones being unmuted. So Richard, back to you until, if you want to keep going for another, kind of do the next part, and then we'll take a short body break to just, again, look after ourselves.
Wonderful. Okay, so what we've really looked at now is some of the realities that we all confronted with, some of the challenges we confronted with. And the whole point of the session is not to reflect on the past. It's to start looking forward. So fundamentally, we're not objects that are acted upon by factors or circumstances beyond us. And if we were, it would just lend itself to bitterness and resentment and anger and frustration. Instead, we're subjects. And as subjects, we can choose our path and choose our destination. But by choosing it doesn't mean it's going to be an easy choice and an easy journey. The journey is tough. It requires discipline and courage and persistence. And that's what we're really going to be talking about now, is the future, not the past. And how can we create new realities? But we have to take one more step back in order to take a leap forward. And the step back is to ask ourselves, what has happened right now? Why are we in this situation? All of us, no one being exempt from it. We assume that it's COVID-19. That's the assumption. And yes, COVID-19 has contributed in many ways, especially with social isolation and social distance. But what has fundamentally happened here is that over the last 14 years, there's been this radical economic slowdown globally, and it's created inequality. We also see productivity, despite technology helping us and supporting us in our lives, productivity is at a 20-year low. There's a lot of reasons for this. I'm not going to discuss it necessarily in this section. The future of jobs. There was a study by a team at Oxford University looking at the future of jobs over a 10-year period of time. Will they be there? Will they not? 702 professions were analyzed. And what they found was that 47% of jobs today will not exist in 10 years' time. Skills instability, the skills that we have now, we've already seen it. We have to recalibrate all the time. The skills that we have now, according to the World Economic Forum, according to the International Labour Organization, 50% of us will have to upskill in the next couple of years. Not a weekend course, but a significant upskill. We see the recalibration work, a lot less secure employment, a lot more gig economy. We also see the prevalence of loneliness escalating by 33% over this period of time. So fundamentally, it's the combination, the set of COVID-19 over the fourth industrial revolution that has created the reality that we're all experiencing. So the question is, these are external factors that we can't control. But these external factors are the reason why we are so stressed. And some of these reasons we can control. So we look at economic downturn, job and employment insecurity, financial pressure, reduced access to healthcare are the outcomes. If we look at this drive for productivity, every business saying we need to be more productive, we need to be more efficient, we're going to create more demands on our teams, longer working hours, we're going to create more family and work conflict. We're inducing burnout states into our teams. That is the productivity. We also know that the future of jobs and skills instability has tremendous social implications, social injustice. We've also got more employment insecurity, job insecurity, lack of control, financial pressure, because we don't have the security that we used to have. At the same time, the recalibration of work lends itself to injustice and employment insecurity on a scale that we can't begin to understand, and low support and financial pressure, limited access to healthcare. And finally, loneliness. We just feel unsupported, unloved, unappreciated, unvalued, undervalued. So there's an interesting principle in Aikido, and I don't practice Aikido, but I just found this principle really powerful and very impactful. And that principle is that if you want to successfully overcome an opponent, the overcoming of the opponent means that we're going to come up against COVID-19 and the fourth industrial revolution. If we go head to head with the fourth industrial revolution and try and create more productivity, and we try and create more social justice, and we change economic landscapes, I mean, it's a great motivation. We should be inspired to do that, but it is very much out of our control. A lot of these things are only within the control of large institutions and governments. But what we can control is the manifestation of these stresses in us, in our teams, in our lives. So if we look at this landscape, we say, can't change the economic downturn, can't change the loneliness factor, can't change the recalibration work. It's happening. It's beyond our control. Skills instability, it's happening. We can't slow it down. But this is not what's driving the situation. What's driving the situation is long working hours, low support, work-family conflict, high demands, lack of control, employment insecurity, work effort-reward balance. These are the things that we can control. We can adjust these stresses to such an extent that we can ring-fence our lives and the lives of those who fall within our sphere of influence. And this is what we're talking about now, is shaping the way forward. And that's where we enter this health and wellness and performance program. or paradigm. So there's been a lot of research in this space, a lot of research looking at wellness programs. Is it enough just to offer healthy foods? Is it enough just to offer exercise facilities? Is it enough to offer psychological counseling? What is going to work? What is going to change the lives of the people that make up the business, its employees or its teams? A business is completely dependent on its members for its success. And what can a business do to change it? What can you do for your team in order to change their reality? And this was the goal, and this was the task of this very powerful meta-analysis by a team of Australian researchers who looked at 90 studies on wellness programs over a 15-year period, looking at performance outcomes in organizations. So the first thing they looked at was the reactive programs. My team's experiencing stress, let me support and help them. Amazing. Very socially responsible. So you have counselors and return to work program and time off. But they were looking specifically at organizational performance. We know that the individual is going to benefit from this. They also looked at programs that are ameliorative, programs that are invested in providing skills and tools and resources to people who need them, help them cope better under the circumstances that we're confronted with. And then finally, they looked at the preventative approach, basically saying that these are the stresses that exist in the business. Let's ring fence it. Let's buffer it. Let's stop the stresses from inculcating itself into our workforce or influencing our workforce. So a preventative measure. It's a little more complex, a little harder to apply. At the same time, superimposing that on resilience coaching. Resilience being the ability to adapt successfully to ever-changing circumstances. Help our teams adapt. Buffer the stresses that don't need to be there. That was the theme, that was the narrative. So when we look at this, most of the South African programs and most of the programs around the world are very reactive. The problem happens, we're going to solve it. Some programs have become ameliorative, where let's give our teams skills, tools, and resources. But very few programs are preventative. So the researchers wanted to have a look at how this translated into organizational profitability, organizational success and engagement, and everything that we can measure. The reactive measure, nothing. No translation to the business. The ameliorative, moderate, not bad. The preventative, transformed people's lives, transformed the business. That is the power of early intervention. But there was one comment at the end of the study that really stood out for me, and I'm going to quote it. Individual-focused, i.e. reactive, approaches are effective at the individual level, favorably affecting individual level outcomes, but tend not to have favorable impact at the organizational level. Basically, if you react to stress in your business with your teams, in your family, it's not going to work. It's not going to change your reality, change your landscape, change your lives. So what we have to do is we've got to prevent. We've got to be able to step in and stop the stress from affecting the people that create the business success, the trajectory, the future. Now, we've got a tremendous understanding of what stresses people in life. There was a very strong meta-analysis, again, big study. It actually was 2 studies over 2 different periods of time. It involved 28,000 people over 40 years, looking at organizational stress, which was a reflective of society. It wasn't just businesses, it was societal stress. What causes stress in our lives? So what they found over this very extensive cohort, over this very lengthy period of time, was that 4 things emerged. 4 things cause us stress. The primary one being when we feel that we have no control in our lives, which means that those individuals who are working their way up the organizational ladder, basically lower ranking employees, have less control, therefore are more stressed. And this is what the study found. Individuals who are at the entry point in their careers in an organization have a 300% higher likelihood of dying prematurely in a 10-year period than the CEO. And we always think the CEO's got the responsibility and the pressures and the boards and the investors and the shareholders and the pressure at the bottom. The issue actually lies lower down in the organization, lack of control. So if we look at our times right now, we have no control. We're challenging control. We have no certainty. The study also found that support was a very influential factor in our experience of stress. So environments where we don't have support, this causes a tremendous amount of stress us in different ways. Mental health compromise, physical health compromise, premature death. If we look at our times right now, support has diminished. We are working remotely, we are disconnected. Disconnected from friends, disconnected from family, disconnected from colleagues, disconnected from everything that we once knew. So support has diminished. So we've now checked 2 in the times that we live in. They also found that an effort-reward balance was very influential in our experience of stress. Now, an effort-reward balance simply means that I'm putting in an effort in my work, in life, in relationships, and I expect to be remunerated in some way, either appreciated, valued, or have opportunities going forward in growth, or alternatively being paid very well for what I do. So an effort-reward balance fundamentally involves 3 factors: appreciation, growth, compensation. And if we look at the times, most businesses are restructuring and downsizing and recalibrating. There's no bonuses, there's no growth in the financial domain. A lot of them are actually slash salaries. At the same time, there's no growth opportunity. Businesses are just holding tight. They're not growing and expanding, and there's not this boom and blossom. And then finally, people are so busy trying to survive the times that who has time to appreciate the value of other people in our lives? So appreciation is also gone. So we can see why we're so stressed: support, control, effort, reward, balance. And lastly, fairness. People need to be in an environment that is fair and just. And if we look at the times are not fair. There's nothing about the time that we live in that is fair. And these are the factors that we need to control. If you want to control your team, if you want to control your family, if you want to control your friends, if you want to change the lives of the people that fall within your sphere of influence, this is what you got to look at. Now, I can't cover each and every one of these sections, but I can go through support and just the value of support. Louise, when did you want to take the break?
I think this right now would be a good idea, Richard. So if we take, it's now 2 minutes past 11, if we take an 8-minute break, which means we're going to start again at 10 past. So this is just an opportunity, quick body break, get that cup of coffee, and then we're going to keep going at 10 past 11. Okay, Richard?
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you. Material. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're talking support and the value of support in transforming the lives of people that fall within your sphere of influence, family members, teams within a business context, and even broader than that. Now, the thing about support, if we are able to create more supportive environments, this is what we stand to gain. Reduce the depression risk by 60%. We also stand to enhance or are able to enhance organizational trust by 82%. Simply through or by creating a more supportive environment. So where I'd like to take this is to a checklist where we can evaluate ourselves subjectively within the context of providing emotional support for those that work with us, those work under us, family members. Now, it simply looks like this. What you're going to do is you're going to rate yourself. Yes being 3 points, no being 1 point, and obviously work in progress 2 points in the middle. And calculate that at the end of this questionnaire. And what I'd like you to do is just put your score into the chat. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, do you feel that you're encouraging your team enough? Yes, work in progress, or no? Do you feel that you are available for your team when they need you? What are your communication forums? Are you engaging in regular team meetings or regular workshops or both? Or do you have the luxury and opportunity to do one-on-ones on a regular and ongoing basis? 3 points for all. If you're not doing any of them, 1 point. Do you feel that you express enough compassion and empathy that's authentic, with meaning and feeling, within the context of your team? And do you feel, lastly, you have developed a personal connection with your team, especially during this period? So what I'd like you to do is just tally that up and then pop it into the chat, and let's see what we've got in terms of scoring. Wow, off a cracking start there, 13, 13, 12, 11. Unbelievable on the emotional support side. So here's the thing, is that if you were scoring yourself between 9 and 15, it suggests that there's a robust emotional support system within your group, and you have mitigated the risk of stress within the framework of support. Now, there's still things that we can do and should do. With each and every one of us, we'll have a strength. So for me, it's encouragement. I'm pretty strong in encouraging other people. So we often assume that if we have a strength and we've got the 3 points for it, we don't need to work on it, develop it. But the interesting thing in life is that a lot of our success in life is built on 1 or 2 things we do exceptionally well. So we don't want to take that away. We actually want to build on it, become more encouragement, develop, or whatever your particular strength was. But my point is that you want to take your strength and you want to augment it. You want to build it. You want to leverage off it. At the same time, there may have been a particular weakness, whether it be personal connection or expression of compassion, empathy, whatever it is. There might be several. But I encourage you to focus on one, not all. One area that you feel that you might be lacking in terms of support from an emotional standpoint with your team. And that should be one of your goals in the future, is to develop that weakness and leverage off that strength. But we're now going to move to instrumental support. Instrumental support is fundamentally the one thing that is broken down in these times with the remote working conditions. So what I would like you to ask yourselves, and make a note of this, do you feel you're doing enough to practically assist your team? Are you in the trenches with them, in the work that they're doing? Have you created enough feedback opportunities? Do you feel that you invested enough time and effort and energy and resources in skills development for them? Are you championing health and stress management to the extent that it's needed? And do you feel that you're supporting your team authentically on their personal growth journey? So we're looking at it from an emotional standpoint. We're all scoring marks off the charts. Incredible. Now we're looking at it from an instrumental standpoint, practical, on the ground. Once you've got your score, if you can just put it into the chat so we can get a general landscape. So what we can see here is a certainly robust, really positive feedback that's coming back, but you can see there's an obvious limitation when compared to emotional support. So often we believe and we feel that the support that we need in life is purely emotional, but in many contexts and in many respects, we need a combination of that emotional and instrumental. And this is pretty much our focus area going forward. Because like the emotional support, we should be scoring around 9 to 15, and it's a little bit more challenging for many individuals. This being said, some of us are more successful within the framework and the context of instrumental support when compared to emotional support. Some of us are intrinsically more empathetic and more caring. Others are much more engaging and really good on the practical side of things. So we've got to go to the area that we're comfortable in, but at the same time, we've also got to work and develop ourselves and our skills in this leadership capacity, within this leadership framework. So very much like the emotional support, we want to create strength in our strengths, leverage off our strengths, develop our strengths, and identify one single area in instrumental support that we are going to commit to in terms of overall change. And that is our next step and our next process in this journey. Now, this is what you stand to gain should you implement these strategies going forward. There was a large meta-analysis looking at support and giving of yourself, giving of your time, investing in others, and how it translated to businesses. The meta-analysis involved 38 studies looking at organizational behavior, involved 3,500 business units. And what they found was environments that are more supportive instrumentally and emotionally have lower turnover rates, better at problem solving, have lower costs overall, are more efficient, more profitable, and of course, are more productive. So that is what you stand to gain by creating these support platforms, refining support in your environment. But there's a couple of power moves that can really transform your relationship with your team, with people close to you, with people that fall under your care. And these power moves have a profound effect on our neurochemistry, a profound effect on neurochemicals such as dopamine and oxytocin, which motivate us and bond us to other people, connect us to others. Now, these power moves will typically include, or my suggestion for these power moves will typically include, when connecting with people remotely or in person, greeting them, getting a sense of where they're holding. One of the strongest ways we connect to people is reflecting and identifying their emotional experience. So when we say, hi, how are you, how are you doing? Instead of saying, hi, how are you doing? To say, hi, how are you doing? You look happy today. You look sad today. You look tired today. You look well today. You look motivated today. Identify what their projected experience is. Because that bond that is created will occur through neurochemical channels and neurochemical means is powerful. It builds support, builds connection. Also, seeing that so many people are experiencing challenges with health. We're in the flu season, we've got COVID. The stress in itself is causing a decline in immune functionality and well-being. One of the most innovative ideas that one of the companies I look up to the most was the fact that they had a dedicated team who would call sick members of the business and offer assistance. Can we go get you medication? Can we go get you lunch? Can we go get you this? What do you need us to do? It sends a very powerful message of empathy, care, support. And what you build here is a very strong relationship going forward. You build a lot of trust and a lot of connection. So much so that those individuals who work within caring and supportive environments and have caring and supportive leaders will be 67% more engaged. And that's what every business is looking for, right? Like engagement. But sometimes we go down the wrong paths in order to evoke engagement, asking for greater longer working hours, putting more demands, more expectations on people. And we can handle that to a certain extent. But one of the most powerful tools is to slow it down and show that softer side, that empathy, that care, that support, the affection, the genuine willingness and want for the other to be well, to thrive, and to succeed. But it's one thing to support others when we're well and we're coping and we feel in control of our environment and we feel supported. What happens when we're not? What happens when we ourselves are struggling? When we are navigating a difficult space? What do? How do we get through this point? And I think a lot of us are experiencing that right now. So we have two possibilities, two scenarios that we need to understand in order to change our personal landscape. We know what we need to do for others, create environments of greater emotional support, create environments of more instrumental support, and we're going to see engagement improve and everything that we want to improve, not to mention the well-being of the individuals. But when we are struggling, the first step for us is to communicate. Stress has a very funny effect on our well-being and our health, especially emotional health, in that when we get placed in a crisis situation, a challenging situation, our natural tendency is to become insular, to introvert, to remove ourselves from people, from society. And the reason why is because society expects strength. Society expects success. It reveres success. And if we're feeling vulnerable and projecting vulnerability, historically, it wants nothing to do with us. But the best thing that we can do is change our behaviors and change our patterns, recalibrate this social construct. And in order to do that, we have to be more communicative. If you need emotional support, speak to the people that provide you emotional support. If you need more instrumental support, speak to those people. You have to communicate it. At the same time, the best form of communication is action. People mirror our actions. So if we need support by offering more support to colleagues, there's this reciprocity factor. If we need knowledge and expertise and competencies, the best way to obtain these vital resources is to share our knowledge, expertise, and competencies. So that's the first step. But the second talks to the final part of the session, is how do we personally cope with our stress better? Because we know in order to change the landscape for those around us, we need to buffer and ring fence key stresses, support, control, effort, reward, balance, and injustice. We know what we need to do and how we need to go about things. But at the same time, we're struggling. And that's the final part. What do we do in this construct, in this framework, at this time to change our reality on a personal level? Louise, over to you.
Yeah, so we at the end of this part, we're going to be having an opportunity for every person to say to themselves, firstly, what are my key takeaways? And secondly, what do I want to do differently as a result of having been on the session? So as you keep going for the next part, please capture those thoughts, because we're going to give you an opportunity to talk to a few colleagues about what you've just discussed and what you've discovered, so that the learning can be sticky. I think we'll keep going for now, Richard, and then we'll create an opportunity for kind of that personal reflection and reflection with one other person after this next part. Thank you.
So this final section looks at our personal approach to stress management. How do we overcome these challenges that are not going away, these challenges that are only going to become more complex, that are only going to infiltrate themselves more into our physical, emotional, mental well-being? How do we navigate this space? So in the past, if you asked me a year or two ago, more like 2 years ago, how do I manage my stress? And my response would have been exercise a little bit more, eat a little bit better, create opportunities, shut down. That would be enough. If you would have responded by saying, no, I'm doing most of these things, I would say that you've got it. You're on top of it. But in this new reality, this COVID-19, fourth industrial revolution set, that tactical approach, saying I'm stressed, therefore I must react a certain way, does not work. It will not work. It will not move you forward. In these times, we need strategy. We need to look at the future and say that the future is going to be uncertain. The future is going to lack certain elements of support. The future is going to hold by certain injustices. The future is going to make me feel undervalued. But how do I cope? How do I control my physical, emotional, and psychological sets under these circumstances? And this is how. There's a 4-part process. The first part is you've got to shift your mindset. How you see something is ultimately how it will materialize. If you see stress as bad, it will materialize as negative health outcomes. The best example of this was a study that was performed on 30,000 individuals over 8 years, looking at the perception of stress. If you believe that stress is bad for you, how does it affect you? Now, everyone on the session who believes that stress is good for you, no one. So we all believe that stress is bad for us. And the researchers wanted to compare those individuals who believe that stress, not so bad, not going to be that impactful, versus those individuals who believe that stress was the end and it was going to impact all faculties. So at the end of the study, what they found was those individuals who believed that stress was not bad for you. Stress was a vehicle for change and growth and opportunity. Those individuals had a 3.5% higher risk of developing a chronic disease in an 8-year period or dying prematurely. By contrast, those individuals who believed that stress was bad for them and were worried about stress, like we all are, their risk of developing a health issue in an 8-year period of time was 43%. That is the power of the mind. Now, moving on from this, there was a team at Harvard University. Jeremy Jamison was the lead researcher, iconic individual. And they were looking at the reframing process, saying that, okay, we confronted with stress, but stress is a vehicle. Short-term stress is really good for me. If I can use it, access it, I can advance my position. Anything I do, I will be more successful if I use my stress. So what they did was they did 3 or 4 different studies looking at those individuals who were trained in reframing, saying that stress is an advantage. Don't fear it. Don't despair. Don't worry about it. Use it. Those palms that are sweating, the heart that's pounding, the lungs that are going crazy, that's your body's way of telling you, you've got this. That is your gift. And it is. And truth be told, it is. Those individuals, no risk of cardiovascular issues in response to stress. Cognition, attention, focus, much better. Almost every health parameter was unaffected on a negative level from stress, all because of reframing. Now, when we think differently about stress, the most amazing thing happens is we release surges of dopamine. We release norepinephrine. Now, these molecules give us clarity and give us focus and cognition. Just by changing the way we think, we change our neurochemistry. But dopamine's greatest asset is that it gives us grit and determination and persistence. We never give up. Dopamine will never let you give up. And when we reframe our stress, huge advantage. The way you see it is the way it will translate. Step 1. Step 2 builds on the narrative that I described earlier. So step 2 involves a change in the way we react to stress. As I mentioned earlier, so often when we get stressed, we feel vulnerable. When we feel vulnerable, we want to remove ourselves, hide. But if you go back into our ancestral past and you look at all the challenges we're confronted with, viral pandemics, food shortages, world wars, we've come through all of them. How did we come through every single event in history? By coming together, by connecting. That's how we overcome challenges. So now we've got this double-edged sword here. We've got, on the one side, we've been forced remotely. And on the other side, we have this social construct where when we're stressed and we're weak and we're vulnerable, go into your corner until you feel better. We've got to fight that. And if we fight that, amazing things happen. Because when we connect, when we are stressed, When you feel scared, when you feel overwhelmed, and you connect to someone, your body releases this hormone known as oxytocin, this neuropeptide, this powerful, powerful molecule that one will override fear. It actually inhibits the fear center of the brain, but two, creates an amazing behavioral shift. So oxytocin will make us feel more confident, greater sense of self-worth, fearless, more empathetic, have more trust in ourselves and others. When we release oxytocin, we change our neurochemistry to neurochemistry of success. Excessive cortisol in our system, the stress hormone cortisol, makes us feel fearful and anxious and scared. And we lose confidence and self-worth and self-esteem. This is the antivenom. This is the molecule that will override the adverse effects of stress. So my suggestion is, in part 2, when you feel stressed, reach out and connect. When you feel stressed, support others. When you feel stressed, show more compassion. When you feel stressed, be more charitable. These are all activities and actions that transform your neurochemistry to an extent that will change your reality. If you look at the best sports teams in the world, what defines the best sports team in the world? Not the fact that they have the best players, I can assure you. That I've seen time and time again, the teams with the best players do not often perform the best. The greatest sport team in the world are the most connected, are most support. We saw that with our Springbok team. What made them so strong was their unity. They played for each other. They connected, they shared, they supported. And that's what we need to do in a crisis. And the mechanism behind that change is oxytocin. The third step is to control your stress. As I mentioned earlier, stress can be very good. It's only good in short periods or short bursts. So when we feel stressed, we must shut it down if we don't need it. So we can use that adrenaline state. We can use the superpowers that stress offers us in that short term for half an hour, for an hour, for 2 hours. And when we feel that we don't need to be adrenalized, we don't need to be energized, shut it down. Do your breathing exercise. Engage in meditation. Engage in yoga. Why? Because these activities stimulate the vagus nerve, the stress off button. But the stress off button will also reduce inflammation in the body, help better regulate your immune system, which has other benefits, emotional stability and greater adaptability going forward. So the third step in this continuum, and an important step, is to control the uncontrollable. When you feel stressed and overwhelmed, take a moment in the day to shut it down. Make it a discipline. So now you've changed your mindset. Now you've altered your behavior. Now you're controlling stress. But the final step is the acknowledgement and realization that when we are stressed for long periods of time, there's this physical breakdown. Everything becomes weaker. Our muscles become weaker. Tendons become weaker. That's why there's a prevalence of injuries. Bones become weaker. There's also an emotional shift. We become more volatile. There's a cognitive shift. We're less clear and less motivated and less focused. Stress in the long term. And this doesn't change. This just keeps accelerating. Now, where we're holding right now in the cycle of stress with COVID-19, the fourth industrial revolution, is this protracted period where most of us are experiencing those three things. So we need to acknowledge and realize that we need some sort of countermeasure, counterbalance. And that counterbalance is lifestyle. That counterbalance is exercise more frequently, because when we exercise, we elevate those molecules that promote emotional and cognitive integrity and stability. When we exercise, we change our hormonal profile to suit strength and development and well-being. If you eat a little bit better, cutting out the processed sugars, limiting the coffee, limiting the alcohol, limiting the processed foods, limiting the fried foods, doing the basics, you'll regulate your immune system more effectively, and you'll be able to control your stress far more effectively. The reason why is that the digestive system, what happens in the digestive system will affect your neurochemistry. So if you're eating foods that are constantly offending your digestive system, you're always bloated and always uncomfortable, you will not release a specific neuropeptide known as neuropeptide Y. What neuropeptide 1's job is to control the negative emotional effects of the other stress hormones. When we release it, we feel no anxiety. We feel calm. But if we're in this constant state of inflammation, irritation of the digestive tract, we don't release it. And we don't have that benefit. That is the power of diet. Nutritional supplements like B vitamins are critical in stress management. The reason why is because when we are stressed for long periods of time, a fundamental process that occurs in the body called methylation. The best way to explain what methylation is that your body's this complex orchestra. And methylation is the conductor. Everything needs a certain timing and a certain sequence. And methylation is that process of governing who goes on when and what, and how and who, and why. So if we're taking B vitamins, we can support methylation. In fact, there's been a large meta-analysis looking at high-quality B vitamin or multivitamin supplementation and its effect on stress. And you'll have, off the back of a week or two of B vitamin supplementation, a 35% reduction in perceived stress. It's in my first book, The Stress Code. But there's a whole host of factors like being outdoors. And a good example is you go outside, you're extremely stressed and you go into a beautiful area. If you've got a beautiful garden, you go into your garden. If you live in a beautiful suburb, you go to the suburb. If you're at the coast, you go to the beach. Within 14 minutes is a 15% decline, correction. Within 15 minutes is a 14% decline in cortisol. So you can change your chemistry, change your hormonal balance based on the environments that you're creating. So we need to acknowledge and realize that we've got to control our exercise and activities. We need to control our diet. We need to control our environments. We need to control our nutrition to the best of our ability. And that way we can support ourselves through these challenges. Now, no one of these elements is going to create that ultimate solution, that ultimate strategy. But when you put them together, that is where the strength lies. That is where the power lies. And that is the message I want to put across here. Is the strategy of mindset and behavior, controlling your stress axis and rebuilding constantly within that physical, emotional, and cognitive framework. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Richard. Wow, you've made us think, I'm sure. Everybody would agree with me with that. So what we want to do now is we want to, typically what happens in these sessions is we in one conversation and then we run to the next one, and that's not going to be helping us to integrate anything of what happened today. So I'm going to ask you to do something a bit countercultural, and that is to create a thinking environment for yourself for the next 5 minutes. We're going to give you 5 minutes to do this. 5 minutes to just respond to 2 questions. And I'm going to ask you to do it in a very particular way. So instead of normally what happens is we respond with bullet points, this time I'm going to ask you to respond in full sentences to these 2 questions. And just sit there and kind of respond. And the purpose here is we call this discovery writing. So we want you to experience the power of watching yourself write. And when you do that, discovering what you think through the process of writing, through this process of articulation. So we're going to do that individually, and then we're going to go into a breakout room. Actually, we'll go back to the pairs that you were earlier, and to just go and share with the person you were with earlier, just a few things of what you've written down. But we're going to start by just for yourself, for your own benefit. This is for no one else. Give yourself 5 minutes of discovery writing time, and just see what comes out of that process. So I'm putting the questions in the chat. The first question is, what are my key takeaways? And it's very useful to just jot them down in full sentences, as if you were having a conversation with your partner and told him what happened today. And secondly, what do I want to do or change as a result of being in the session for yourself and for your team? So we're going to all switch videos off. We're going to mute the sound. We're going to give you 5 minutes of uninterrupted time for you to respond to those questions. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms. So enjoy these 5 minutes. So welcome back, everybody. We have about 7 minutes together. And we want to make sure that we just capture any thoughts, reflections, appreciations, and you're welcome to either share in the chat or just unmute your microphone and we'll give you an opportunity to share any thoughts that you might have in response to everything that's happened over the last 2 hours. So just unmute your microphone if you want to say something, or just post your thoughts in the chat.
Louise, hi, it's Afsana here. I have a question for Richard around the breathing, which he spoke in the first 5 minutes. Is there a reason behind the specific sequence? And the reason I ask is, in yoga, asana breathing is 666, and my Reiki person does 464. I have so many different combinations to it. It's like passcodes. Is there a reason for the one you suggested now?
So it's a great question. So what I would do is Google this technique, the 478, Andrew Weil. So Dr. Andrew Weil, and he uses this methodology almost exclusively. But when I wrote my book, The Stress Code, I was looking, there's a lot of controversy in the breathing space in terms of what is that best technique? What is going to evoke or elicit the key responses that we're looking for? And the key response is shutting down the stress axis and controlling the immune system. And there was a very big meta-analysis looking at all the studies out there and basically the effectiveness of all these different protocols. And it boiled down to something very, very simple. We typically breathe at a rate around 14 to 20 breaths a minute. That's our typical breathing rate. And when we slow our breathing rate to around 6 breaths a minute, that is when this process will kick in. So it doesn't matter how you construct it. You can do 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, or 5 counts in, 5 counts out, but really super slow, or 6 out, whatever it is. The breath hold will stimulate certain receptors called chemoreceptors, gas receptors within the bloodstream. They're actually at the base of the brain. And that will evoke a higher response in certain instances with pertaining to shutting down the stress axis. So to answer your question in more simple terms, it doesn't really matter. Whatever technique you're employing, as long as you're breathing around 5 to 6 breaths per minute, you're going to create the positive shift that you're looking for. This being said, the 478 tends to evoke the response a little bit quicker and a little bit more effectively. So those are some thoughts and ideas, but all these protocols and principles apply. Remember, 5 to 6 breaths a minute, however the sequence is, and you will get the result.
Great, thank you. I also experimented with the Wim Hof Method, and that's exhausting. I tried it, but it's not as easy as those 3 breath counts.
Yeah. It's a slightly different physiological response that he's trying to evoke. Also has its place in application, can be very powerful, but slightly different context.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Afsana, for that question. I just want to prompt Tasneem to please share with us the link to the evaluation form. She's going to put that in the chat function, and if you could please just click on that link and give us your thoughts, it would help us with future sessions, and it would be very useful for Richard to have your feedback. Selamusa Gina, I see you unmuted. Did you want to ask a question or so? Doesn't look like it. It looks like that was an accidental unmute. We have 3 minutes left. Anybody else who want to add a question, ask a question, or share some thoughts? Or there was Donna said, thank you for a most beneficial session. I'll be able to share so much with my team. Loredana, thank you for this is such beautiful reflections. The takeaway is the reflections questions on emotional and instrumental support. Thank you from Liesel and Lisa. So it looks like we've come to the end of the session. Please, everybody, if you could just click on that link for the feedback form. Thank you so much, Richard. I'm sure that you're going to Lisa's asking about a copy of the slide. Lisa, we did talk about this before. This is Richard's intellectual property, but he's going to share a few key slides, just kind of with a few key takeaways for you. hopefully that will be good. We'll add that to the information we'll send you afterwards. So I think with that, we're going to say goodbye, and I'm going to ask Kim and Richard to just stay on the call for a few seconds so that we just have a quick conversation. And the book is called Stressproof, The Game Plan, Richard Sutton. It's behind Richard's on the wall. You can see it behind him as well. And then there's another one called The Stress Code, and they are both definitely worth reading. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and please be in touch, and we look forward to seeing you online again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.